Hello everybody, my name is Caroline Diarte Edwards. I'm a director at Fortuna Admissions and I'm here with my colleague today, Jessica Chung, who was MBA Associate Director of Admissions at UCLA Anderson and is now an expert coach at Fortuna. So Jessica, we wanted to talk today about recommendations and it's a big part, it's a very important part of the MBA application process. So what are your thoughts and what's the advice that you give to new clients about how to pick their recommenders?
Yeah, that's a great question, Caroline. So with letters of recommendation, I think number one, you really need to think about who truly knows you best and knows your work, knows your achievements and accomplishments and your potential to do well in business school and as a future business leader. So sometimes people get hung up by titles. You know, they might think, oh, well, I could get a recommendation from our CEO. Not that I work with him very closely, but he knows my name and he knows I exist and he knows I do a decent job or a good job. I would steer away from getting too hung up on the titles because those folks can write really, positive recommendations for you, but typically they tend to be very generic. They then tend to not have much insight. And they just tend to have just kind of general praise for a candidate. So it doesn't really add or enhance anything or add a distinct perspective on a candidate compared to somebody who you've worked with very closely. By all means, if you work closely with the CEO or a C-suite executive, of course, that would be a great person to get a recommendation from. But another great person could be your current manager, a current project leader on maybe a big project that you worked on where you really had some significant accomplishments and really added to the overall project itself. From those people, that's also going to be truly helpful and insightful. And so really think about who, again, knows you best and who can really write those detailed examples of how you showcase leadership, why you're a great candidate for business school, how you showcase, great teamwork and collaboration and presentation skills, all those things that the admissions committee wants to know about you. And they'll get some of that from the rest of your application, from your essays, interview, but they also want it from a third party, from a different person's perspective. And so when you're, definitely also I would say the other part is to read the instructions of the letters of recommendation, because sometimes they will ask you, some schools will say, we only want letters of recommendation from current supervisors or someone that you've known for less than X number of years, right, or more than X number of years. And so, if that's the case, and you don't want to go to someone who you worked for 5 years ago, because that's not going to be the best person to address those questions. And so make sure that you're picking the candidates or the recommendation providers that the schools are asking for. And every school might have a little difference or nuance in what they're looking for, in their recommendation providers. And then the last part, and I think the most important part, is to, once you select your recommendation providers, to sit down and coach them and just prep them through the process. It doesn't mean you need to tell them what to write, because you really want to have their unique voice come through in the letters of rec. But you really don't want them to go into it blind, because they might not know that the schools are looking for something that's very detailed with very specific examples. The person might think, oh, it's fine if I just write this person, was the top performer on my team, and then just kind of left it at that. Like, that's great praise, but really, again, business schools want to see all of that detail and the stories that really back up the reasons why your recommender thinks you're an amazing person and a great person, a great employee, and someone who's going to just have great potential to succeed later in life. And so sit down with them, maybe go through your resume, talk about your accomplishments, refresh them on what you've accomplished over the last few years or the time that you've worked together, because they might forget just because everyone's so busy. And then also go through and talk about your goals. Tell them why you want to go back to school, what you hope to get out of business school and what you hope to do after in the future. And they might also think about, things off the top of their minds, maybe that you haven't considered in terms of the ways that you've contributed on the team or for this particular individual. Maybe you haven't thought of, but then that person might say, oh, you know what, there were all these other things that you've done, that really stood out, and I'm going to make sure to mention this in my letter of recommendations for you. So when it comes time to picking and kind of prepping your letters of recommendation providers, think about some of these steps, and I think it'll really help to enhance and add another layer of information about your candidacy to your application.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure you've seen when you were at the admissions committee that sometimes great candidates would have recommenders where they clearly hadn't had those discussions, and there just wasn't enough detail, or it was just too high level, or not the right examples, or just didn't really back up the strengths that the candidate was highlighting themselves. And so the recommendations are pieces of the puzzle and need to fit into the bigger picture. And so having the discussion that you mentioned is really important to sort of make sure that there's that coherence and consistency across the application.
Yeah, and I also loved when in the letters of recommendation when the recommenders didn't always talk about the exact same examples about why you're a good leader or why you're a great team player or whatever the case might be. It's nice to get different kind of different stories. So just that's why it's also important to think about kind of the people that you worked on in different projects and maybe in different points in your career or in different points in time. Definitely I would say someone that's a little bit closer in terms of sorry, this part's a little messed up, but someone that that you've had most recent experience with. But I think also people who have seen growth and who have seen kind of your career history or over a little bit more time could also be helpful too, just having that kind of different perspective.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And what are your thoughts, Jessica, about candidates who feel that they can't get their current supervisor as a recommender? What should they do?
Yeah, I would say, if a school allows for current or previous supervisors, maybe look for somebody that you worked for in the recent past who can still speak to those strengths, the qualities that you can bring into the business school community, speak to your leadership and your career goals and your potential to do well short-term and long-term beyond school. And also, I would also consider folks maybe a little bit outside the box who would still have exposure and have insight into your potential. So maybe you worked, especially if you were really involved in extracurricular activities or volunteer work, or maybe you made a significant impact working pro bono on for a nonprofit, let's say. And maybe it's only a short amount of time, but that person really saw you make a significant impact on their organization. I would think that would be another great perspective to have to bring into your application. And that can add another piece to the puzzle, like Caroline was saying. Maybe somewhere it can also show passion that you have for activities and interests outside of just the workplace. It can also enhance how you're going to be a great contributor to the community during your time in school. You're not just going to go to school and just focus on career, which are important, but you're also going to add really something meaningful to your community and to your classmates, and then also bring that as an alum in the future too.
Yeah, absolutely. Great advice. Thank you so much, Jessica.